Chapter 1. An Unexpected Guest. Once upon a time there lived a hobbit in a hole in the ground. Do not mistake it for a dirty, damp hole, with worms wriggling and roots dangling from the walls, smelling foul and unpleasant. Nor was it a bare, sandy hole where there is nothing to eat and nothing worth eating. No, this was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. It began with a perfectly round door, like the hatch of a ship, painted green, with a shiny brass knob right in the middle. The door opened inward into a long passage, rather like a tunnel in a railway, only without smoke or soot, warm and comfortable instead. The walls were paneled with polished wood, the floor tiled and carpeted, and along the sides stood rows of well-polished chairs, with plenty of pegs for hats and coats, since hobbits were fond of company. The tunnel wound on and on, going deep inside, though never all the way to the heart of the hill, as the people around called it. Along both sides were many, many round doors, one after another. Hobbits disliked stairs, so bedrooms, bathrooms, pantries, lots of pantries, wardrobes, they devoted entire rooms to clothes, kitchens and dining rooms were all on the same level, opening off the main tunnel. The best rooms were all on the left-hand side, for only these had windows, deep-set round windows looking out onto gardens and green meadows that stretched down to the river. Now, our hobbit was a very respectable hobbit, and his name was Baggins. The Baggins family had lived in the neighborhood of the hill for time out of mind, and they were considered very respectable indeed, not only because most of them were wealthy, but also because they never had adventures or did anything unexpected. You could tell what a Baggins would say on any subject without even asking him. But this story is about one particular Baggins who was to be caught up in an adventure, doing and saying things altogether unexpected. He may have lost the respect of his neighbors, but he gained something else instead. Well, you will see for yourself what he gained. The mother of this hobbit. Oh, but what is a hobbit, you ask? Perhaps I should describe them a little more clearly, for they have become rare in our time, and avoid the big people, as they call us humans. Hobbits are a small folk, about half the height of an ordinary man, and shorter than the bearded dwarves. They have no beards, and there is nothing particularly magical about them, except for a remarkable ability to disappear quickly and silently when large, clumsy people like you and me make a noise trampling about. They are inclined to be round-bellied. They dress in bright colors, chiefly green and yellow. They never wear shoes, for the soles of their feet are tough as leather, and the tops are covered with a thick, warm brown hair, much like the hair on their heads, which is curly. Their fingers are long, skillful, and brown. Their faces are good-natured, and they laugh a great deal, especially after meals, of which they eat too when they can. Now you know enough about hobbits to follow the tale, as I was saying. The mother of this hobbit, that is, of Bilbo Baggins, was the famous Belladonna Took, one of the 3 remarkable daughters of the Old Took, the head of the hobbits across the water, the small river running below the hill. It was whispered, among other families, that long ago one of the Tooks had married a fairy. Of course, that was nonsense, but there was still something odd about the Tooks. Now and then one of them would go off on an adventure, quietly disappearing, and the family hushed it up as best they could. Still, the Tooks were not considered as respectable as the Bagginses, though undeniably richer. After Belladonna married Bungo Baggins, she never went off on adventures herself. Instead, Bungo, Bilbo's father, our main character, built her the most luxurious hobbit hole to be found either on the hill or under it, or across the water as well, partly with her money, and there they remained until the end of their days. But Bilbo, her only son, though in manner and habit he seemed a near-perfect copy of his quiet and respectable father, had nevertheless inherited something of the Tookish blood, a little spark of oddity that only awaited its chance to show itself. That chance, however, had not yet come, not until Bilbo Baggins was grown, about 50 years of age. He still lived in the very hobbit hole his father had built, the one I described in detail at the start of this chapter, and by now he seemed well rooted in it. Fate, however, had other plans. One fine morning when all was peaceful, when the air was full of green scents and only the faintest noises stirred, and when hobbits were still many and thriving, Bilbo was standing by his door after breakfast, smoking a long wooden pipe. So long in fact that it nearly reached his hairy toes, well brushed I might add, when Gandalf came by. Yes, Gandalf himself. If you had heard only half of what I have heard about him, and I know very little, you would be prepared to hear the most astonishing tales. Wherever he went, stories and adventures sprouted like mushrooms after rain, strange and marvelous, beyond belief. He had not passed down this way for ages, not since the days when his friend the old Took had died. So long had it been that many hobbits had quite forgotten what he looked like. He had gone about his own business, vanished from sight, since the time when the hobbits of today were still small children. And there he was, that very morning, when our Bilbo, unsuspecting and comfortable, saw only an old man with a staff. He wore a tall pointed blue hat, a long grey cloak, a silver scarf that glittered, and great black boots, and his long white beard hung down to his waist. "A very good morning," Bilbo said, meaning the words as a polite compliment on the fine day. The sun shone brightly and the grass was very green, but Gandalf's sharp eyes, glinting beneath great bushy eyebrows that stuck out from under the brim of his hat, looked at him and said, "What do you mean? Do you wish me a good morning, or do you mean it is a good morning whether I want it or not? Or perhaps you mean that this morning is one on which we ought to be good?" "I mean all of them at once," said Bilbo. "This morning is splendid, for sitting outdoors and blowing a pipe of smoke. If you have a pipe about you, sit down and have a fill of mine. There's no hurry. We have the whole day before us." Bilbo sat himself in a chair by the door, crossed his legs, puffed a long breath, and sent out a perfect ring of smoke that drifted up into the air and sailed over the hill. "Wonderful," said Gandalf. "But I have no time for smoke rings this morning. I am looking for someone to share in an adventure, and it's proving very hard to find." "I should think so in these parts. We quiet folk have no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things. Make you late for dinner. I can't see what people find in them." And Bilbo stuck one thumb behind his braces, blew a larger smoke ring, and took up his morning paper, pretending to pay Gandalf no further attention. He had already decided that the old fellow was not one of his kind, and he rather wished him to move along. But Gandalf did not move. He stood leaning on his staff, gazing at Bilbo until the hobbit grew uncomfortable and rather hot under the collar. "Good morning, then," Bilbo said at last. "We don't want any adventures here, thank you. You'd best try over the hill or across the water." He meant it to sound final. "Indeed. And your good morning now seems to mean that you want me gone, and that, until I disappear, the morning will not be good," said Gandalf. Not at all, my dear sir, forgive me, I don't believe I know your name." "Name? Oh, I do know yours, Mr. Bilbo Baggins, and you do know mine, though you may not remember. I am Gandalf, and Gandalf is me. Good gracious, what times we live in, that the son of Belladonna Took should wish me good morning as though I were a peddler of buttons, Gandalf. Gandalf, bless me. Not the wandering wizard Gandalf who gave my grandfather, the old Took, a pair of diamond studs that fastened themselves and never came undone until ordered? Not the Gandalf who used to tell such wonderful tales of dragons and goblins, of giants and the rescue of princesses, and of the luck of widows' sons. Not the Gandalf who made such particularly excellent fireworks. I remember those." "Do remember," Bilbo went on. "The old Took used to give parties on Midsummer's Eve. Splendid they were too. Fireworks bursting like huge lilies and lion shapes of fire, snapdragons and laburnums of flame hanging in the sky all night. Long magnificent! You see, our Bilbo was not quite so dull as he liked to pretend, and he was very fond of flowers. Good heavens, he continued. So you are Gandalf, the very Gandalf who knows all about the young lads and lasses who disappeared off into the blue for wild adventures, climbing trees, visiting the elves, sailing off in boats to who knows where. Bless me, it was you who turned everything upside down in these parts in those days. I had no idea you were still at it. And what else should I be at, said the wizard. It is pleasant to know you remember something of me, at any rate, even if only the fireworks. That gives me hope for you yet. And for the sake of the old Took and for your mother Belladonna, I shall give you what you have asked for. But I haven't asked for anything, said Bilbo. Yes, you have twice now. You asked me in, you asked me for it. That settles it. I shall give you an adventure. It will be very amusing for me and good for you too, and quite profitable, if you ever get over it. Sorry, but I don't want any adventures. Thank you, not today. Good morning. But please do come to tea any time you like. Tomorrow, say. Come tomorrow. Goodbye. With that, the hobbit turned and hurried into his round green door, shutting it firmly behind him. Not too rudely, you understand, for after all, a wizard is a wizard. Bless me. Why on earth did I invite him to tea? He muttered to himself, as he scuttled down the passageway. In truth, he had already had a good breakfast, but after that alarming conversation, he felt he could do with a cake or two and a drink to steady his nerves. Meanwhile, Gandalf still stood outside the door, laughing quietly to himself. After a while, he stepped up to the door and, with the point of his staff, he scratched a curious mark on the green paint. Then he strode away, just as Bilbo was finishing his second cake and congratulating himself on having cleverly avoided adventures. The very next day, however, he had almost forgotten about Gandalf entirely. He had a poor memory for such things, and usually had to jot down little reminders like Gandalf Wednesday tea. But being so flustered yesterday, he had written nothing. So when the bell rang, just as he was sitting down to tea, Bilbo suddenly remembered everything. He rushed into the kitchen, put on another kettle, fetched more cups and saucers, and a plate or two of cakes. Then he hurried to the door, all ready with the words, "I'm so sorry to keep you waiting." But it was not Gandalf. It was a dwarf, standing at the door with a blue beard tucked into a golden belt and bright eyes under a dark green hood. Before Bilbo could say a word, the dwarf stepped inside as though he had been invited. He hung his cloak on the nearest peg, bowed low and said, "Dwalin at your service." "Bilbo Baggins at yours," said the hobbit, quite flustered and surprised. When silence became awkward, he added, "I was just having tea, pray come and join me." A little formal, perhaps, but he meant it kindly. And what else would you do if a dwarf arrived unannounced and hung up his things in your hall without so much as a "by your leave"? They had not been sitting long, nor reached even their third cake before the bell rang again, this time louder than before. "Excuse me a moment," said the hobbit and ran to the door. "Well, at last. Here you are," he began, all set to greet Gandalf. But again it was not Gandalf, it was another dwarf, an old one with a white beard and a red hood. He too let himself in at once, as if he had been expected. "I see they have begun to arrive." "Already," he said when he caught sight of Dwalin's hood hanging on the wall. He hung his own beside it, folded his arms across his chest, and bowed. "Balin at your service." "Thank you," said Bilbo, with astonishment so great that he hardly knew what to say. It was not at all the proper reply, of course, but the words "begun to arrive" had thrown him completely. He was a hospitable sort, to be sure, but he did like to know who his guests were before they arrived, and to be the one doing the inviting. A flicker of fear crossed his mind. What if there weren't enough seed cakes in the house? In that case, it would be he himself, for he knew well the duties of a host, who would have to go without. "Come in and we'll have some tea," he managed at last after taking a very deep breath. "I'd prefer a mug of beer if you have it," said Balin with his silver beard, "though I wouldn't say no to a seed cake or two if it's not too much trouble." Plenty in the house, Bilbo exclaimed, astonished at himself. And more astonished still when he found himself darting down into the cellar, filling a great mug with beer, snatching up 2 delicious little seed cakes with raisins, baked especially for his own private after-supper, and hurrying back upstairs. In the dining room, Balin and Dwalin were already seated at the table, talking together like old friends, though in truth they were brothers. Bilbo had scarcely set down the beer and cakes before the doorbell rang again, once, then twice. Oh dear, that must be Gandalf, thought Bilbo, as he rushed down the hall. Not at all. It was 2 more dwarves, both wearing deep blue hoods, with silver belts and yellow beards. Each carried a bag of tools complete with a spade. They slipped neatly inside as soon as the door was cracked open, and Bilbo was past being surprised. "What can I do for you, my dwarvish friends?" Bilbo asked. "Keely at your service," said one. "And Filly at yours," said the other, as they both took off their blue hoods and hung them on a peg. "Your servant, gentlemen, and yours and your families," replied Bilbo, remembering his manners this time. "I see Dwalin and Balin are here already," Filly remarked. "Let's join the company." Company, Bilbo thought. I don't like the sound of that one bit. Let's sit for a moment, try to think. Goodness, I must have a little more. Drink? He crept into a corner and took a sip, while the 4 dwarves chattered away of mines and gold and troubles with the vile goblins and the loathsome tricks of dragons and all manner of things Bilbo neither understood nor wished. All of it smelled too much of adventure. Ring, 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 ring. The bell pealed again, this time with such violence it seemed some hobbit lad must be hanging on the pull. "Who else can it be now?" said Bilbo, blinking. "About 4 more, I should think, by the sound," Filly answered. "And we saw several. More behind us, too." The poor little hobbit sat down in the hall with his head in his hands, wondering what on earth had happened and what was to come next. Would they stay for supper, too? The bell rang yet again, and he had no choice but to answer it. Not 4, but 5 dwarves this time. Another had arrived while Bilbo lingered in the hallway. He had scarcely cracked the door before they all trooped in together with a chorus of "At your service" and polite bows. Dori, Nori, Ori, Oin and Glowin were their names. Soon 2 purple hoods, a grey one, a brown one and a white one, were hanging on the pegs, while their broad hands went to golden belts as they marched straight into the dining room. Now it looked very much like a party. Some called for ale, others wanted dark beer, and one even asked for coffee. But every one of them, without exception, was delighted with seed cakes. For a while the hobbit had to keep scurrying about to set things right, and when a great coffee pot was set upon the hearth, and the dwarves had finished with the seed cakes, and moved on to buttered scones, there came a tremendous pounding. Not the bell this time, but a heavy thumping on the beautiful green door, as though someone were banging on it with a staff. Bilbo rushed down the passage, furious and bewildered, and quite exhausted. He flung the door open, and in tumbled a heap of 4 more dwarves, one atop another, and there stood Gandalf leaning on his staff and laughing. He had given the door such a knock that the paint was chipped, and in doing so had quite rubbed out the secret mark he had made there the day before. "Careful, careful, my good hobbit," he said. "That's not the sort of thing you do at all. You ought never to keep visitors standing on the doorstep and then fling the door open as if it were a pop gun. Allow me to introduce Beaver, Bofer, Bomber, and a most special guest, Thorin." "Your humble servants, sir," said Beaver, Bofer and Bomber, bowing in line. At once they hung up 2 yellow hoods, a pale green one, and a sky blue hood with a long silver tassel. That last one belonged to Thorin, a most important dwarf indeed. None other than Thorin Oakenshield himself, and he was not in the least pleased about having been sprawled flat on Bilbo's floor, with Beaver, Bofer, and the enormously fat Bomber tumbling down on top of him. So at first, Thorin carried himself with great pride and did not speak of service at all. Only after poor Bilbo had stammered his apologies several times did Thorin mutter, "Very well, let it pass," and stop frowning. "Now we're all here," Gandalf said, watching the row of 13 hoods hanging neatly on the wall, the finest party hoods one could wear, and his own hat among them. "A merry gathering indeed. I hope the latecomers have found something to eat. What's this? Tea? No thank you. A glass of red wine would suit me better." "The same for me," Thorin added. "And some raspberry jam and apple tart for me," said Bifur. "I'll have meat pies and a bit of cheese," Bofur chimed in. "Pork pasties and salad," Bomber requested. "And cakes, and ale and coffee if you've got them," shouted the others. "Fry us a few eggs while you're at it, my good fellow," Gandalf called after Bilbo as the poor hobbit trudged toward the pantry. "And bring out a cold chicken and some pickles. He seems to know my larder better than I do," Mr. Baggins muttered. He was utterly flustered and beginning to feel afraid. Was this some dreadful adventure suddenly breaking in upon him? After hauling together bottles and dishes, trays piled high with food, plates, knives, forks, and spoons, Bilbo staggered beneath a monstrous heap. He was dripping with sweat, his face burning, and on the edge of losing his temper. "May you choke on it, you greedy dwarves," he grumbled aloud. "Why doesn't one of you lend a hand?" And lo, there were Balin and Dwalin at the kitchen door, as if they had sprung up from the floor, with Fili and Kili right behind. Before Bilbo could speak, the four of them had seized the laden trays, swept everything into the dining room, and laid it all out in a whirlwind. Gandalf took the seat of honor, with the 13 dwarves crowded round. As for Bilbo, he sat on a little stool beside the hearth, nibbling a dry crust, though he had no appetite left, pretending nothing unusual was happening, and certainly nothing that could involve him in adventures. The dwarves ate and talked endlessly while time slipped by. At last, the meal was done. Bilbo rose to clear the dishes. "I do hope you'll stay for supper," he asked politely, in his most refined tone. "Of course," Thorin replied. "We'll remain after supper too. Business must wait. There's singing first. Now clear the tables." 12 dwarves leapt to their feet. Thorin alone, noble as he was, remained speaking with Gandalf. They stacked the dirty plates, heaped up the leftovers, and marched in procession to the kitchen, each balancing a towering pile of crockery crowned with bottles and jars. Poor Bilbo followed, trembling. "Oh, my dear sirs, please be careful. Don't trouble yourselves. Let me do it." But instead of answering, the dwarves burst into song, chip the glasses and crack the plates, blunt the knives and bend the forks. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. Smash the bottles, burn the corks. Of course, they did not carry out their mischievous words. In a twinkling, everything was washed, dried, and stacked neatly, while Bilbo spun helplessly about trying to keep up. Then all returned to the parlor, where Thorin now sat with his feet on the fender, calmly blowing smoke rings. He sent them, drifting up the chimney, across the mantel clock, under the table, even to the ceiling, where they lingered in perfect circles. But no matter how fine Thorin's smoke rings, Gandalf proved the master. With a soft puff from his clay pipe, he sent a small ring darting through Thorin's larger ones, turned it green, then set it spinning above his head, where it hovered, like a little cloud. In the dim firelight, the wizard looked mysterious and uncanny. Bilbo stood entranced. He too enjoyed blowing smoke rings, but now blushed to remember his feeble efforts on the hill the other day. "Now bring out the instruments," Thorin commanded. Fili and Kili pulled fiddles from their bags. Ori, Dori, and Nori drew flutes from beneath their cloaks. Bomber dragged in a drum. Bifur and Bofur fetched clarinets from the hall. Dwalin and Balin excused themselves. "We left ours on the doorstep." "Bring mine as well," Thorin called. They returned with great vials and Thorin's own harp. Wrapped in a green cloth, a harp all of gold, fair and marvelous. And when Thorin struck its strings, the music began, a strange, sweet harmony, flowing like water. Bilbo forgot everything else. His heart wandered far away, across rivers beyond the Hobbit hole under the hill, to distant lands beneath a foreign moon that shone like a star in another sky. Through the window that looked out upon the hill, the darkness had already crept into the room. The fire in the hearth, still burning in the month of April, had begun to wane, yet the dwarves played on and on, while Gandalf's beard cast long shadows that danced upon the walls. Night had flooded the chamber, the fire had gone out, and the figures could no longer be clearly seen. Still the dwarves continued their music. Suddenly, one voice rose, and then another, as they began a deep and solemn song of the dwarves, an ancient song once sung in the stately halls of their far-off realms. Hear now a fragment of that song, if words without tune may be called a song. Far over the misty mountains cold, deep in the ancient caverns old, before the dawn we must away, to claim the hoard of yesterday, the dwarves of yore, in might renowned, the finest craftsmen to be found, of emerald, turquoise, jade so fair. They gathered treasures rich and rare. For king and lord, for elven prince, they wielded hammers, strong and fierce. The sunlight gleamed on newly wrought steel, on shining sword hilts bright as fire, on silver corselets that they wore, on starry crowns forevermore, on golden chains around the throat, where moon and sun alike did float. Cups they carved for joy and cheer, golden harps for all to hear. Yet silent now they lie in gloom, their music hushed in timeless tomb. The pine trees tall in tempest moaned, the fire red on torches shone, the bells were ringing through the dale, and men awoke with faces pale, the dragon's wrath, more fierce than flame, brought towers down and towns to shame. The mountains smoked beneath the moon, doom struck swiftly, none too soon. The dwarves then fled, though death was near. They heard the call, yet knew no fear. Beneath the moon, beneath the fire, they fell beneath the dragon's ire. Far over the misty mountains cold, deep in the ancient caverns old, before the dawn we must away, to claim the hoard of yesterday. As the hobbit listened to the song of the dwarves, there stirred within him a sudden love, a love for marvelous things wrought by magic and by cunning hands, a selfish, jealous love, a fierce desire that still burns in the hearts of dwarves. And he felt too a strange longing awakening, a yearning to go forth and see the misty mountains, to hear the whisper of the pines and the roar of waterfalls, to explore deep caverns, and to wear a sword instead of carrying a walking stick. He looked out the window. The sky was dark, and the stars glittered above the trees. He thought of the dwarves' treasure, glittering also in their secret halls. Suddenly he saw a flash of fire behind the hill. Perhaps someone was lighting a pile of brushwood, and to Bilbo it seemed as though dragons were swooping down upon his quiet hill, bathing it all in flame. He shuddered and quickly became once more Mr. Baggins of Bag End Underhill. He rose, trembling all over. He hesitated. Should he fetch another candle, or pretend to fetch one and hide himself away down in the cellar behind the beer barrels until the dwarves had gone? But at that very moment he realized that the music had ceased, and that all the dwarves were gazing at him, their eyes glowing in the dark. "Where are you off to?" called Thorin. His voice made it plain that he had guessed Bilbo's thoughts. I was just going to fetch a lamp," Bilbo faltered. "We like the dark better," the dwarves all chorused together. "Dark business is best done in the dark. It will be a long time yet before dawn." "Oh, of course," said Bilbo, hastily sitting down again. He missed his chair and bumped into the fender, knocking over the poker and the tongs with a crash. "Hush," said Gandalf. "Let Thorin speak." And Thorin began. "Gandalf, my fellow dwarves and Mr. Baggins, we are met together in the house of our friend, our fellow conspirator, our excellent and audacious hobbit. May his toes never fall off, and may the ale never cease to flow in his cellars." He paused, as if expecting poor Bilbo to make some courteous reply, but the poor fellow could not see it as a compliment. He bit his lip, ready to object to being called audacious and, worse still, a conspirator. But his insides were in such turmoil that he could not utter a word. So Thorin went on. "We are assembled here to discuss our plans, our ways, and means, our schemes and devices. A little while from now, before the break of day, we shall set out upon a long journey, a venture from which some of us, or perhaps all of us, save only our wise counselor, the wizard Gandalf, may never return. This is a solemn moment. Our object, as I believe you all know, is clear enough. Yet for Mr. Baggins' sake, and perhaps also for the younger members of our company, I mean Killy and Feely, a few words of explanation will not be amiss." Such was Thorin's manner. He was an important person. Unless he was stopped, he might go on like this until he ran out of breath, without ever telling you anything worth hearing. But he was interrupted in the rudest way. Bilbo could bear no more. When he heard the words, "may never return," the poor hobbit felt something rising in his throat, and at last it burst out, a shriek, shrill as a steam whistle at the opening of a tunnel. The dwarves leapt to their feet, overturning the table. A blue light flared from Gandalf's staff, and in the sudden flicker they saw Bilbo kneeling by the hearth, shaking like a jelly. Then he fell flat on the floor, crying wildly, "Struck by lightning! Struck by lightning!" And they could get nothing more out of him. The dwarves carried him to a settle in the parlor, set some drink beside him, and returned to their dark business. "This fellow is excitable," said Gandalf, once everyone was seated again. "He has odd moments, but he is one of the best, fierce as a dragon in a pinch. If you had ever seen a dragon in a real pinch, you would realize that this was only poetical exaggeration, applied far beyond anything a hobbit could be expected to do. Even old Took's great-granduncle Bullroarer, who was so huge for a hobbit that he could ride a horse. Bullroarer it was who charged the ranks of the goblins of Mount Graham at the Battle of the Green Fields, and knocked their king Golfimble's head clean off with a wooden club. It sailed 100 yards through the air, and fell into a rabbit hole, and thus the battle was won, and the game of golf invented at the same moment. At that moment, the feeble descendant of Bullroarer awoke in the parlor. After resting a while, and steadying himself with a sip of wine, he crept toward the door of the dining room. Glóin was speaking, and these were the words Bilbo overheard. "Pah!" or some sound equally scornful. "Do you truly think this fellow is fit?" Gandalf described him most grandly for his fierceness, but one shriek like that at such an ill-timed moment would be enough to rouse an entire family of dragons. Then many of us would perish, I say. I tell you plainly, he screamed from sheer terror, not excitement. To speak truth, had I not seen the wizard's mark upon the door, I would have thought we had lost our way. And when I first beheld that little creature hopping about on the carpet, I doubted at once. He looks more like a grocer than a burglar. That Bilbo pushed open the door and stepped in. The Tookish blood had triumphed. He felt ready to abandon both breakfast and his feather bed, so long as these strangers would think him bold. Indeed, he was near bursting with rage at the phrase, "little fellow hopping about on the carpet." Yet many a time afterwards, the Baggins side of him bitterly regretted his rashness, saying to himself, "Bilbo, you idiot, why ever did you commit yourself to this muddle?" "Begging your pardon, gentlemen," said he, "I happened to overhear your talk. I shall not pretend to understand all that has been spoken, least of all this business of burglary. But I do perceive one thing, and I consider it only proper behavior. You take me for useless. Very well then, I shall prove what I can do. There is no wizard's sign upon my door. I had it freshly painted only last week. Likely you have the wrong address. The moment I beheld this disagreeable company, I thought so. Still, let us say you are come to the right place. Tell me what is required, and I will see it through, though it lead to the uttermost east, or to battle with the venomous creatures of the last desert. For on my mother's side I am descended from the hero they called Bullroarer, Yes, but that was long ago, Glóin broke in. I am speaking of you yourself, sir, and I assure you, upon your door there is indeed a magic mark, the very sign our folk have long used. It declares your profession. Interpreted, it means expert burglar seeking employment, prepared to accept perilous tasks, reward guaranteed in full. You may call yourself a seeker of treasure of the highest order if the term burglar offends you. Some prefer it so, we care not. Gandalf informed us that a local expert was seeking work with urgent need and bade us meet here on Wednesday at 5 o'clock. As for the sign, I myself inscribed it, Gandalf interposed, and I had. Good reason. You asked me to find the 14th man, and I have chosen Mr. Baggins. Let any one of you say I was mistaken, that I picked the wrong person or came to the wrong house, and be off at once with your 13 companions and the queue. Ill luck that clings to you, and if you do not like it, be off the lot of you back to your coal mines. The wizard glared so fiercely at Glóin that the dwarf shrank in his chair. Bilbo too was about to speak, some timid protest perhaps, but Gandalf suddenly turned and fixed him with such a stern look from beneath his bristling brows that the poor hobbit shut his mouth again. Enough wrangling, Gandalf declared. I have chosen Mr. Baggins, and that settles it. If I say he is a burglar, then a burglar he is, or will be when the occasion comes. He is not so simple as you deem him, nor even as he himself believes. The time will come when you, if you survive it, shall thank me for him. And now, Bilbo, my lad, bring a lamp. We must examine this. On the table, beneath the great red-shaded lamp, the wizard spread out a parchment which looked much like a map. It is the work of Thror, your grandfather, Thorin, he answered, to the eager questions of the dwarves. Here is the map of the Lonely Mountain. I do not see that it will help us much, Thorin replied after a long look. I know well enough the country round about the mountain. I know where lies Mirkwood, and where are the Desolation of the Dragon. There is the dragon marked in red upon it, Balin observed. If ever we get to the mountain, we shall see him without a map. There is a point that you have not observed, Gandalf contradicted. A secret entrance. Do you see the runes on the west side and the pointing hand among the others? They mark a hidden passage into the lower halls. It was once secret, Thorin mused, but is it so still? Smaug has dwelt there long, and surely knows every cranny of the caverns. He may know of it, yet it avails him nothing. And why not? Because it is too small. 5 feet high and 3 may walk abreast, so the runes declare. Smaug could not have squeezed through, not even when young, far less now after devouring many a dwarf and many men of Dale. In my opinion, the door is too big, Bilbo suddenly put in. He had never seen a dragon in his life, and the only holes he knew were hobbit holes. But once again he was carried away, forgetting that silence is often golden. He loved maps dearly. There was one of the hill and all his walks, hung in the hall at Bag End, with red ink for his favorite paths. I do not understand how it can have remained hidden from all others, even if the dragon did not notice it, he asked, for you must remember he was only a small hobbit. There are many ways, Gandalf replied, but how exactly this door was concealed, I cannot yet say. From the instructions on this map, I gather only this. The door is locked and fashioned to blend with the mountain itself. A trick well known to dwarves, if I'm not mistaken. You are not, Thorin confirmed. Indeed, I had forgot to mention the key, Gandalf said, producing a small silver key with a long shaft and an oddly shaped head. It came with the map. Here it is. Keep it safe. One would hardly be careless with such a thing, Thorin said, hanging it on a fine golden chain about his neck, the chain long enough to slip beneath his cloak. Now at least all is not lost. A moment ago we scarce knew how even to begin. We thought to make our way eastward, keeping watch as we went, until we came to the long lake. Then, I doubt not, our troubles would truly begin. Not then, but long before, Gandalf cut in. I at least know the way across the country to the east. From there, Thorin went on, ignoring the interruption, we should go up along the running river and try to reach the ruins of Dale, the ancient town that stood on the banks beneath the mountain. But of course, none of us would dare approach the front gate. The river flows right by it and turns under the great rock to the south. The dragon often issues forth from that way too often, unless he has changed his habit. That road is barred indeed, said the wizard, not without the might of some great warrior or hero of old. I did seek one, but these days no such. Blood runs in men's veins. They prefer slaying one another in distant wars. And as for heroes, well, there are a few left, perhaps, but swords are blunt, axes serve for firewood, shields are dish covers, and dragons are relegated to fairy tales. Therefore I turned my thoughts to stealth, especially since I found this secret passage. And here comes in our friend Mr. Bilbo Baggins, a burglar of excellent promise. Now let us return to the plan. Excellent, said Thorin. Perhaps our learned burglar, rich in experience, will oblige us with a few of his rare and clever ideas. He bowed most elaborately to Bilbo. First of all, I should like to know a little more about the job, the Hobbit said, though his head was in a whirl and his insides cold, yet the Tookish blood in him would not allow him to back out. I should like to know exactly about the gold and jewels, about the dragon whose hoard it is, and all such matters. Bless me, said Thorin. Haven't you seen the map? Haven't you heard our song? Haven't we been poring over this for hours? Still, I should like it set out plain and clear and in proper order, Bilbo insisted stubbornly, trying to look businesslike, the same manner he used when people came to borrow money from him. Doing his best, he wanted to appear like a precise, careful expert, intelligent and competent, worthy of Gandalf's introduction. I would also like to hear about the degree of danger, about unforeseen expenses, about the time frame. I need to know exactly what the reward is and all the other details. In truth, all his words boiled down to one simple thought. What will I get out of this, and will I live to see the day I return? Well said, Thorin replied. It has been long, long since the days of my grandfather Thror, when our family was driven from the far north. With our wealth and tools, we migrated to the great mountain you see upon this map. Long ago it had been discovered by our ancestor, old Thrain, but it was only then that we mined its halls, carved out roads, built our houses and forges deep within its roots. I believe they uncovered vast treasures of gold and jewels in those days. At any rate, they grew fabulously rich, and my grandfather became king under the mountain, held in great honor by men. These men lived far to the south, but little by little they moved northward, following the river running until they reached the valley at the foot of the mountain. There they built the prosperous town of Dale. The kings of Dale would turn to our smiths for craft, and even the least skilled among us was richly paid. Fathers begged to have their sons apprenticed, offering ample gifts, especially food, so that dwarves had no need to farm or harvest at all. Looking back, those were truly happy days. Even the poorest dwarf had wealth enough to spend or lend, and leisure to craft fine toys for pleasure, not to speak of wondrous magical objects such as no longer exist in the world. My grandfather's halls were packed with armor and jewels, goblets of gold and intricate works of art. The markets of Dale were reckoned the marvel of the north. Alas, it was that very prosperity which drew the dragons. They are ever greedy for gold and gems, as you know, whether they belong to dwarf, elf, or man. Whenever they can, they steal treasure and hoard it till the end of their days, which means forever, unless slain, though they never use so much as a copper ring for themselves. Indeed, they cannot tell good work from bad, but they know the value of all things, nor can they mend a broken scale of their own. In those days there were many dragons in the north, while the supply of gold dwindled. Dwarves were driven southward, or slain, Desolation spread, laid waste by dragon fire. Among them was the most covetous, most powerful, and most wicked of them all, Smaug the Golden. One day he arose and flew southwards. At first we heard only a thunder like a storm from the north, and then the pine trees on the mountain cracked and fell. Some dwarves were outdoors. I was among the lucky ones, for I was a wanderer in those days, and my roaming saved my life. From afar I saw the dragon swoop down on the mountain in a great flame. He came writhing into the valley, and the trees blazed as he touched them. All the bells of Dale rang out in haste. The warriors armed themselves. The dwarves rushed out of the great gate, but the dragon was already waiting for them there. None escaped. The river boiled into steam. Smoke rose over Dale. Through that mist, the dragon swooped among the warriors and destroyed them, a tale sad to tell, yet not uncommon in the north in those days. Then he turned to the front gate and began to sweep through the halls and passages, the tunnels and chambers, the storehouses and forges. When no dwarf was left alive, he gathered up all their treasure and lay down upon it. That is the habit of dragons. They heap gold and sleep upon it. Later he would slither down into Dale by night, snatching folk away, maidens especially, to devour them, until Dale was utterly ruined. Some fled, many were slain. As for what lies within the mountain now, I cannot say, but I doubt any dare dwell near it. Perhaps only far across the long lake do men still live. A few of us who had hidden outside cursed Smaug. Suddenly, my grandfather and my father appeared, their beards singed. They looked grim indeed, but said little. When I asked how they had escaped, they bade me be silent. You will learn one day. Then we set forth, wandering far and wide, often forced to work as blacksmiths or miners in strange lands. Yet never did we forget the stolen hoard. And now, though life is somewhat improved, Thorin touched the golden chain about his neck, we still dream of reclaiming our treasure and of taking vengeance on the vile Smaug, if we can. Often have I wondered how my father and grandfather escaped Smaug. Now I see they used a secret way. Plainly they themselves drew this map, but how did it come into the hands of Gandalf the wizard, and not to me, rightful heir? I did not steal it, it was given to me, said the wizard. Your grandfather Thor was slain in Moria by Azog the Goblin King. May his foul name be cursed, Thorin muttered. And your father Thrain departed on the 21st of April, 100 years ago, last Thursday. You have not seen him since. That is true. Well, then he gave me the map to pass on to you. As to when and where I chose to hand it over, you cannot blame me. It took me long enough to find you. When I met him, your father could hardly remember his own name, let alone yours. So be grateful. Here is your map. Gandalf held out the parchment. I still do not understand, Thorin said, and neither did Bilbo. The explanation was murky at best. Your grandfather, Gandalf said slowly and darkly, gave the map to his son before he went into Moria. Your father then sought to use it after Thor was slain. He endured many troubles, but never reached the mountain. When I found him, he was a prisoner in the dungeons of the Necromancer. How he fell into that place, I do not know. And what were you doing there? Thorin asked, shuddering suddenly, and the dwarves all shivered with him. That is beside the point. I had my own business, as ever, but it was perilous business indeed. I, Gandalf, barely escaped with my life. I tried to save your father, but it was too late. He had lost his wits, all he remembered was the map and this key. The goblins of Moria have been avenged already. It is high time to deal with the Necromancer, Thorin cried. Do not talk nonsense. That enemy is far too great, even if all the dwarves of the world united. Your father's only wish was that you should read the map and use the key rightly. The mountain and the dragon, those are more than enough for you. Do you hear, Bilbo muttered. and then suddenly he cried out loud. "Hear what?" asked the dwarves, turning to him. Bilbo, hardly knowing what he was doing, shouted, "Hear what I have to say." "Well, say it then." "Yes, I say we must go east, and that is where matters will come to a head. After all, there is still the secret entrance, and dragons must sleep sometimes, at least so I should think. If you sit long enough on a doorstep, you are bound to think of something. Now then, don't you agree we've talked quite enough for one evening? Off to bed. Tomorrow we must be up early, and I shall give you a fine breakfast before you set out." "Before we set out together, you mean," said Thorin. "Are you not the burglar? It is not your part to sit on the doorstep, but to find a way inside. Still, I agree about rest and breakfast. I like eggs with bacon before a long journey, not scrambled, mind you, but fried, well done. And don't break them." One by one, the dwarves called out their orders for breakfast, without so much as a word of thanks, which annoyed Bilbo greatly. Then they rose to their feet. The poor hobbit had to find them all sleeping places, spreading out spare mattresses and cushions until everyone was settled. At last, weary and utterly miserable, he dragged himself to his little bed. He told himself firmly he would not rise early, nor cook breakfast for them. The Tookish blood in him had cooled, and he had no thought of joining any expedition in the morning. Yet from the best bed nearby he could still hear Thorin murmuring, "Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away, ere break of day, to claim our long-forgotten gold." Bilbo fell asleep with those words echoing in his ears and dreamed dreadful dreams. When at last he awoke, the sun was already high,